Hello, in this video we're going to create a nice copper material in Blender 2.8. You know, I've been playing around with EEVEE in the last couple of weeks and I've published several videos about it. If you haven't seen any of them yet, maybe you want to check them out on my YouTube channel. And in the last few days I played around with materials and I wanted to see what I can come up with and what EEVEE supports, even though it's still in alpha version 2. So a couple of years ago, I've created a copper material and it had a pretty wild node tree that you can see here. I took a screenshot and I thought, well, there must be an easier way to create a nice looking copper material, especially with the new nodes that we get in 2.8 for materials, for cycles. So I played around and I came up with something that I think looks very nice. And I'm going to show you exactly, step by step, what I did. So first let's look at some reference pictures of copper. And I took Google image search and looked for copper patina statue. You know that copper, after a while, when it ages and when it weathers, it gets this greenish patina that you can see in this these pictures here. So this one is a nice picture here. You can see here we have the actual copper material, this sort of brownish, red tinted, orangey metallic material. And then in some spots we have this rather rough, greenish patina. This image here is actually a pretty good one because we can see where the patina appears. And it seems that it's always more in the cracks and in the cavities. When you think of a statue or something that people would touch and keep touching, it kind of makes sense that the parts that stick out, they get rubbed and worn, and that's where the copper shows through. And the parts that age and don't get worn, they get this greenish patina. And of course, in our scene, in our material, we want to replicate this effect. And we're going to use the new Ambient Occlusion node. And I'll show you how to do that. Right, so first off, we need a model. And you can go to this URL here from Stanford University. They scanned in some very nice models, very high detailed scans. And for what I'm going to do today, I just took this Happy Buddha statue. And you can download the file right here and then extract the zip file, and you can import the model into Blender. What you get when you download this is a PLY file, and in Blender 2.8 we can actually not import PLY files yet. So just to get the model into our file, I'm going to jump over to 2.79 and import the PLY. So I take my Happy Buddha statue.ply that I downloaded and hit import. Now this takes a few seconds because it's actually a very large, very detailed model that you can see right here. It's actually quite tiny. So first things first, and it's laying on its side. So let me rotate it by hitting R, X, 90, enter. And then we move it down, look at it from front view, move it sort of to the 0 point here. I'm also gonna transform the origin to 3D cursor so that it's right there. Okay, now we notice that it's very, very small, so I'm going to scale it up by hitting S, 10, enter. So now we have this. I'm going to place my camera, sort of like right there, right? And then one other thing I'm going to do right away, when I click on this model, we can see it has over 1 million faces. And so that our Blender viewport doesn't slow down too much, I'm going to add a decimate modifier. and reduce the number to 0.1. So instead of 1 million faces, we end up with roughly 100,000. This also takes a few seconds. And once it is done, I just hit apply, which also takes a few seconds. And then when that is done, I'm going to save this file. Just take this one, happy.blend, and save it. Right, so now we have a model in a blend file. I'm going to close 2.79, jump over here. Here we are in 2.8 alpha 2. Right away, I just select everything by hitting A, then X, and delete. File, go to append. Now select the happy file that we just created, go to object, and take both camera and happy, and append from library. So now in 2.8, we have the model and the camera. I'm going to set up my Blender UI here a little. Right over here, I'm going to switch to shaded view and go to the camera view by hitting the 0 on the numpad. I'm gonna make it a square 1000 by 1000 pixel camera. So this is what we have. Then right away, I will choose an HDRI environment texture that I have here. Doesn't matter which one, can take any one. Great place for HDRIs is hdrihaven.com, by the way. Right, so now we have a background that's lighting up our model. And this is what it looks like. Now we can start creating our material. So I open the I open the shader editor, hit N to close this properties bar. Now with the model selected, I'm going to create a new material. And here in 2.8, the standard for new materials is always using the principled shader, which is fine. We're going to need that. And let's start with the copper material. So first thing, I'm turning up the metallic to 1 to get a metallic material. I think the background is kind of distracting here, so I will just create a quick plane, scale it up, go into edit mode, extrude it on the C, take everything, scale it up. Then I go to edge select mode, select the edge in the back there, and hit Ctrl B to bevel it, and then scroll up on the mouse wheel to make it round. And now we have a nice background, and we can give it a material, call it floor, and just have a white, basically diffuse material. You can also select object, shade smooth, and then in edit mode select everything, scale it on the X, so we can rotate around a little here and have mostly the white background. Awesome. Now back to this material. First, copper material. For the copper material, we're going to use this sort of brownish color. And if you want, you can follow along exactly. I'm going to add a color ramp and make the dark color a hex value of this value. Oops. Let me zoom in so you can see my hex value. This one here, this is going to be the darker shade, and then the lighter shade will be this hex value. Now, to drive the factor of our color ramp, I am going to take a geometry node and take the pointiness output as a factor. And when I hit Ctrl-Shift and left click on this node, the Node Wrangler add-on actually shows us what we get. I forgot to switch over to Cycles. And once I do that, we can actually see our result right here. And you can maybe see, I don't know if this shows up in the video, but my idea behind this is that the parts of the model that stick out more get worn more and they might be lighter. It's just something that I thought. And to make this effect with the pointiness more visible, since the pointiness value is always around 0.5, so around here, we just have to move these in. And we can do that also with this position here. So you take the left one and just enter the position 0.45. And then you take the right one and enter 0.55. And here you can see the effect that we get. You can also play around with if you want it more dark, so if you want more dark areas or more light areas. So this is what you get. I am also going to switch over to GPU rendering and use my GPU so we get a faster render. All right. So this is the base color for our model, copper material. This I plug into the principled BSDF, and since this is a metallic, if I Ctrl-Shift left click on this node, we can now see our copper material. Let me just switch over to the world view and turn up the strength of our HDRI a little so we get more light in the scene, maybe even more. Cool. Now I select the image here on the world scene and hit Ctrl-T, which automatically inserts a texture coordinate and a mapping node for me for the vector, so that I can take the Z rotation of the HDRI and rotate it, and maybe find a position for the HDR where we get more dynamic range, more lights on one side and shadows on the other. So this looks nice, I think. Right, let's go back to our material. Now, one thing you might want to do with a material like copper is you want to add some line. You know, sort of like an oily film inside the metallic surface. And that's actually very easy to do. You just take a texture coordinate node and plug the reflection output into a noise texture. And when I Ctrl-Shift left click this, you can see what we get. I don't know if I picked shade smooth on the object yet. Also, I'm going to turn the scale down to 1. And now we get this sort of like an oil film or a soap bubble-ish kind of material. And we can add this to our color here simply by adding a color mix in here. Set it to overlay and overlay our oil film onto our copper color. And now if we look at the result, you can see we get this. If we just look at this, for example, you can see the effect right here. You can turn up the scale to 2 maybe to get more of this effect visible. And now when we look at the actual metallic shader, this is what you get. I think this looks very nice, and this is our copper material to start with. One more thing to add a little bit more variation is I'm going to add a texture, Scrave texture, Control Shift left click. This is what it looks like. I'm going to scale it up quite a bit to like 100. So we get these nice, very small sort of spots. And I'm going to use this to drive the roughness of my principled node. But since I want a roughness of around 0.4, 0.5, I'm just going to pipe it through a color ramp, setting the first color to 0.4 and the second color to 0.5 to get this gradient between a darker and a lighter gray, and then plug that into the roughness of our principled node. And something you realize here that you can see right away is it's very, very glossy now, and that is because in 2.8 we actually have to take the square root of whatever we want to plug into the roughness input of our principled node. And we can do that by taking a converter math node and just take the square root, and square root is 2. And then we're back to our material here. And when I zoom in, you can see we get these sort of spots here on the surface that give us more of a variation. And I think it makes it look very nice. Okay, so that's that. And I think this is our copper material done. Okay, now let's create the green patina material. Again, we're going to take a principled BSDF node. And for the base color, we're going to take a color ramp again with a darker and a lighter green. And so you can follow along exactly. I have some hex values for you again. So the darker green is this value, and for the lighter green I'm going to use this value. Right, so now when we look at this, we get this green color. Of course, this color ramp isn't doing anything yet. We still need to add a noise texture. And I'm going to crank up the scale here to something like 400. So it's going to be very, very small. Take the factor in here. And you can see we get those spots now. So we have a little bit of a color variation in the green patina. And to really make this effect visible, I'm going to put in a bump node and take the same factor from the noise texture, plug it into the height, and reduce the strength to something like 0.3. So right here, we have now not only a color variation, but also a visible bump effect. So this is what we have thus far. Let me just switch on border rendering so we can have a little bit of a faster rendering. Cool, so this is the patina color done. And now, of course, we sort of somehow need to mix between the copper and the patina. So we need to add a mix node, mix shader node. And this mix factor here is going to determine where we get the copper and where we get the patina. And this is where the new ambient occlusion node comes in. So let me just add input ambient occlusion. If I Control Shift left click this node, you can see what it does. Just like the ambient occlusion effect you have in Blender in general, what it does is the surface becomes darker where there's more surrounding geometry. Sometimes this is also called contact shadow. So where there's a lot going on, it's darker, and where there's basically nothing going on, like on the belly here, it's just brighter. Now, to increase the contrast a little, I'm also gonna switch on only local and increase the distance. And then add, you guessed it, a color ramp. And bring up the black a little. Maybe this is a little too far. And bring in the white a little so we get more contrast. So now this node, this ambient occlusion node, gives us these areas that we want the patina to show up. But we also want patina in the tiny crevices. And for that, I'm just gonna take the geometry node that we already have, plug the pointiness into this color ramp. Now let's look at the result of this. And we're really going to bring in those sliders. So 2.45 and 0.55. Probably even take the white down more. So we get all the black parts here in the detail areas where we also want the patina to be visible. Now to put these two together, we just add a color mix, set it to multiply, plug in these outputs, and when we look at this node, we now have details and the larger areas from the ambient occlusion. Of course, we can always tweak this some more, maybe bring up the black some more. It's easier when you zoom in. Right, so I think this looks pretty cool. And now all we have to do is take the output of these nodes up here and use them as the mix factor for our mix shader that mixes between copper and patina. And when we look at the output of this, we get a lot of patina, so we have to actually turn up the mix factor here to 1. And also one thing that we want to do is, of course, we want to invert this output so that we get the patina in the areas that are black and the copper where this output is white. Cool, so this is our material that we have so far. And I think this looks very nice. Let me tweak the colors of the copper a little more. Maybe we want to make it a bit darker. If we look at this node, yeah, maybe this looks good. Very nice. So this is what we have so far. And this is our copper material in 2.8 cycles using the ambient occlusion node. And this material node 3 here is actually a lot less complicated than what I had before, but I still get the same nice looking result. Now that this is done, let's try to see what we can get in EEVEE. So I'm going to switch over to EEVEE. And right away we get a copper material, but we don't get the patina. So let's click on this node. This is just the copper. Let me look at it in detail. So one thing we notice that doesn't work is the pointiness output of this geometry node. I hope that the Blender developers will fix this. It just doesn't work at the moment. Remember, EEVEE and 2.8 is still in alpha version. But nonetheless, the copper material looks cool. And turning and rotating the viewport here in real time looks very nice. We can see this Musgrave texture. No, wait a second. This Musgrave texture here. That's controlling the roughness. You can see those spots here. So this looks pretty nice. Now let's just look at the patina material on its own. This also looks very nice. Works as expected. Notice that I'm rotating around here and we get a nice real-time viewport. And Cycles was quite slow before. But our mix doesn't work, and that is because the ambient occlusion node actually doesn't do anything in EEVEE. And since this doesn't do anything, we also get no output from this color ramp, and we don't have a mix factor to mix between the copper and the patina. Now, one solution for this is to bake the output of this node. So let's go back to Cycles and look what that looks like. The output of this node looks like this. Okay. I'm going to hide the background for now because I think it renders much faster this way. And in order to bake this output, first of all, I'm going to take the background, remove the environment, and just make it a white color. So we have some light in the scene. Then what I have to do is go to edit mode of this material, open up a UV image editor here. With the mouse over here, you hit U and select Smart UV Project and hit OK. This is going to UV unwrap this model, which we will see down here. Once that is done, it looks like this. Now let's create a new image with a resolution of 2048 by 2048. Zoom out. So now we have this image. We go to the render tab, go down to bake. Oh, one thing we have to note here is that what we're looking at the moment is the output of our mix factor node set up here. And we're looking at it through a viewer node, which is internally actually an emission shader. And that's why we can see this black and white texture on the model here. Now what we want to bake, because this is an emission shader, is the emit bake type. And in order to bake it to this material, we have to add a texture image texture node here. And we open this untitled image, which is going to be the target for our bake. Then you have to select this node and hit bake. And now this takes probably a few minutes. And here we have it. Our UV map is done baking. So everything you see here on the 3D model now, you have here in the 2D image in our UV map. Now we're still looking at this output. Let me just look at the output of the image here. And you can see this is... So now in EEVEE, where all of this doesn't work, we should be able to use this as the mix factor. So let's go back to EEVEE and plug this in to the mix factor. And what we can see here is that it sort of works. And the reason for this not looking right is that we still have this bright white background, which I'm going to switch over to an environment texture again, the one that we had before. And now, look at that. We have a copper material in the EEVEE viewport in real time. I think this looks very nice, and the performance is just amazing. Wow. Now in EEVEE, we might even switch on screen space reflections. I don't know if that changes much. Yeah, you can see it working here. So with screen space reflections, it looks even better. Look at the reflections here. Very nice. Remember, I'm doing all of this here in real time. Let me know in the comments what you think of this. I think this is amazing. Okay, now, of course, we can do the same thing that we just did by baking our mix factor here. We could do for the pointiness that drives the color here, because right now the color here on the pointier parts is not actually brighter. So this has no effect basically at the moment. But I think my work here is done for today. Okay guys, this is it for this video. This is our material. This is the real-time viewport in EEVEE. I hope you liked it. Please comment, subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you soon.